Today's guests are retired Army Sergeant Dan Rose, former Army Captain Meaghan Mobbs, Marine Sergeant Chris Merkle, and Dr. Albert Skip Rizzo, Director of Medical Virtual Reality at the University of Southern California's Institute for Creative Technologies, to discuss the mental health effects stemming from Afghanistan's downfall, their viewpoints on the withdrawal, and what can be done to support those who may be hurting. Dan, Meaghan, Skip, Chris, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
It's like the Brady Bunch up here with everybody. I think this is the record for the number of guests we've had. And, some of you, this is your second time on the show. And so you're all very close and dear friends of mine. And it's great to see you all again. Unfortunately, in the circumstance why we're together today, not so great. So that being said, Dan, Meaghan, and Chris, let's just go around the horn so each of you can briefly introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, pre and post service, and about your time in the military. Chris, you want to go first?
Yeah, so my name is Chris Merkle out of Southern California. Was a Marine forever, Marine grunt. Went to a lot of fun places, Iraq and Afghanistan, ironically, and served great, had a great time over there in a kind of weird way. Went to law enforcement after that, went to contract and went back to Afghanistan because I felt the mission was so great. The need was great over there, and now trying the academic realm. So,
Dan?
So I live in Denver now. I was originally from Wisconsin. Joined up right out of high school, basically to get money for college. After I graduated, I hadn't been deployed yet, so I kind of felt guilty. So I volunteered to deploy over to southern Afghanistan doing route clearance as a combat engineer. So I was there for about 8 months, and I ended up getting hit by an IED. So that left me paralyzed from the chest down. Since then, I was medically retired. I've been working with you, Chris, on SoldierStrong. And now I'm on the national team for the U.S. wheelchair curling. So got that going for me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Congrats on that. Last but not least, Meaghan.
So Chris, thank you so much for having me. I am Meaghan Mobbs. So I grew up in the military. Both of my parents served. My mom was one of the first women to go to airborne school. She deployed to Grenada. My dad served for over 30 years, and it was in the Pentagon on 9/11. And so I decided I wanted to follow in my parents' footsteps. I graduated from West Point in 2008. And then I served as an aerial delivery detachment commander in Afghanistan, providing aerial resupply to 45 remote combat outposts and forward operating bases. I left the Army back in 2013 for a variety of reasons. One of them is my husband is still active duty. It's very difficult to raise a family being dual military, so kudos to all those who do it. I went back to school for psychology. I just graduated from Columbia with my doctorate in psychology, where I focus on trying to understand the crucial role of transition stress, so leaving active duty, re-entering the civilian world, on the lives of military veterans.
So it's Dr. Meaghan now. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Well done. And Dr. Rizzo, share your background, how you started to work with military personnel and veterans, and what that work involves, please.
Okay, well, as you mentioned earlier, I direct the Medical Virtual Reality Lab at the University of Southern California. And really, my work has involved over the last 25 years developing technology-based systems for mental health and rehabilitation. Basically, the scene that you see behind me here is a cut from a virtual Afghanistan scenario that we developed as a tool for treating post-traumatic stress disorder, combat related, by delivering what's called exposure therapy. So our work over the years has evolved across a range of areas, but one of the core areas has been the treatment of trauma by delivering an evidence-based approach within these VR simulations. And Chris, by the way, you're outnumbered here today. You've got 3 psychologists on this panel here.
That means I need a lot of thinking or a lot of fixing to do, I should say. I didn't even realize that. Good point, Skip. So before we get into our conversation about mental health, I'd like to talk about the situation in Afghanistan and get your perspectives on it. One former intelligence official and U.S. Marine who served in Afghanistan told CNBC, while the end result and bloodletting once we left was never in doubt, the speed of collapse is unreal. Meanwhile, President Biden said last week that the chaos we're seeing was, air quotes, inevitable, whether we had withdrawn 10 years ago, 5 years ago, today, or 5 years from now. Did any of you believe that while you're in country, or have your superior officers suggested this end result was inevitable, as President Biden is saying? Meaghan, we'll start with you.
So I don't believe the chaos was inevitable. So even if the fall of the Afghan government might have been, I think this chaos could have been avoidable. There's been, I know this isn't a political talk show, but there's been a variety of missteps by the administration. One of the largest errors was giving up Bagram. So I served out of Bagram Air Base. It's huge, had 2 runways. We would have had the ability to evacuate far more people, far more quickly and far more securely if we hadn't given up Bagram. And broadly speaking, I think, again, that maybe the collapse could have been inevitable, but certainly not the chaos. And I think it's important to mention that in some ways our military, and I say this understanding how provocative this might be, but that our military in some ways has been living a lie. And when you live a lie, nothing is more threatening than the truth. And watching the videos come out of Afghanistan is arguably the loudest truth-telling moment of my lifetime. There's no more running from kind of the situation that we created on the ground. A report came out in 2015 that made a huge splash at the time, but quickly got buried, that we were lying about readiness assessments for our partner forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's not that they don't necessarily possess the ability or capability to fight. It's that we weren't actually capturing it. We weren't measuring it appropriately. And we were fashioning an army in our image, which was just ignorant of that situation. So it's a long way to say that I don't think this chaos was inevitable. I think this could have been avoided.
Dan, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the entire time I was over in Afghanistan, just being in a line level unit, I never really had a picture of, like what the big picture idea was or whatever. So for me, it felt like Groundhog's Day. Like we'd basically just go out, drive every route, look for bombs. At night, they put more bombs back. We'd go out, look for more bombs, and it was just the same thing over and over again. And I guess I also didn't even really see what the objective or the end goal ever was and what we were working towards. So I guess I never did see a victory possible coming out of Afghanistan.
And Chris, how about you?
I appreciate Meaghan's that 30,000 foot view, and I think that's a very realistic assessment on the ground. And then being in a different role in that the Department of State role, it's getting to see the entire country and kind of seeing it from a different lens. It was really hard because I saw it from the people lens, not in that military lens, and it was very hard because you want to support them, you want to believe them, but they're just not. Say what you will about their history, but they're just not war fighters as we see them. They're just really gentle, nice people. And even the training ground to ground, they just wanted, I think, like she said, they just wanted to appease us and try to do what we asked, try to let's do this military things. Let's do what these guys are trying to say. But yeah, on the ground, just personally, they just don't have that same, it comes from we're a very individualistic society where they're coming in like this, they want for the greater good. They're more worried about crops and tea and just being friendly, and they're always very nice. But it's hard to take that, and they don't have that instill our boot camp, all the training that goes into it, all the basic training and that methodology of breaking us down and making us into that killer model, literally of, singing songs about doing all those things to set that mind frame, get us set up to do our job and destroy it. They don't, you can't do that with just doing some calisthenics and shooting at a range. You just can't build that mindset in, and we can't instill freedom. That has to be something that's done from within.
And maybe as a follow-up to that, President Biden also said of the Afghan government and people, we gave them every chance to determine their own future. We could not provide them with the will to fight for that future. Do you agree or disagree, and why? Maybe Chris, I'll have you go first this time.
Oh, yeah, just carrying on that. Yeah, you can't instill somebody that will to fight. And I said, before we came along, even when we were there, all of you that were there know it's not even I hate that term, second or third role, but it's almost in the dark ages, not by their own fault. It's just because they've been under somebody else for so many years that anywhere is just, they're barely existing out there, what we would consider civilization, water, and like that. So for them, that bigger picture of being self-autonomous and having that liberty and that freedom is something they've never experienced. And you can't really instill that with somebody with some uniforms and some weapons. And so it has to be internal driven, just like our fight for democracy, kind of that being pushed down, like, hey, you can't do this with taxation, things like that. They've never experienced that. So they didn't have that internal drive. We were there doing everything for them, all the heavy lifting, the driving, and slowly left seat, right seating, and kind of showing what we do. And when all else failed, we call in our air support, but that doesn't happen once we're gone. So.
Dan, how about you?
I think one thing that I noticed in where I was at, in the districts of Zari and Panjwai, was that there really wasn't a national Afghanistan identity for them. The locals that we interacted with, it was that alley that they grew up in. They would take their produce into the city of Kandahar to the bazaar or whatever to sell it. But I mean, that was about it. They were born there, they lived there, they died there. There wasn't an overarching concept of what the country was. I think that was more of our idea projected onto them or whatever. I don't know if it was ever fair to ask them to do that.
And Meaghan?
Just a caveat, a little bit off what Dan just said, right? When I said earlier that we fashion an army in our image, this is a very tribal nation. We pulled people out of their locality and then had them serve in different locations. That works in America. Like, you can be born in Tennessee and be stationed in North Carolina, for example. That's not the way that that country necessarily works. And by doing that, we were disconnecting a populace from really the nexus of where they felt they belonged. So we were trying to fashion them in our image. And I will be honest, the Afghans have lost more every year on average than we did in 20. And that's not to say that our losses weren't significant and great, but the idea that they haven't fought, I think, is a big misconception on what they haven't been willing to do. And I think that we're also like, there's, one of the number one rules of warfare, the enemy always gets a vote. We have been very good at underestimating the capability of the Taliban. So they aren't fighting by kind of traditional rules of warfare. They are finding power influencers in these small areas and then executing them and their families. And that spreads, right? The idea that you can get the toughest person, the most hard to get person, and you kill them, and then you kill their family. And that creates this ripple effect throughout the community. And they're also extraordinarily good at psychological warfare. And we're seeing so much of that come out. And so the idea about a will to fight, I think, is really multifaceted. And then boiling it down just to that, I find a lot of problems with.
So Skip, Stephen Biddle, who's a professor of international and public affairs at Columbia University, ascribed the collapse to a herd psychology mentality of sorts. He said, when the US announced a total withdrawal, that sent a signal to Afghan soldiers and police that the end was near. And it converted chronically poor motivation into acute collapse because nobody wanted to be the last man standing after the others gave up. Biddle also said, once the signal was sent, contagion dynamics thus took over and the collapse snowballed with increasing speed and virtually no actual fighting. Does a chain of events this massive, this catastrophic, come down to such simple dynamics, or is the contagion dynamic more complicated than that?
Well, I think certainly it's more complicated, but this captures it in a nutshell. When people lose hope, when they fear that no matter what they do as an individual is going to have an impact, or at worst, keep their family alive. That's a pretty strong demotivator for standing up and being not only the last guy standing, but the first guy shot. There's a reason, Afghanistan is viewed as the, the cradle of lost empires or something along that effect. I think everybody that's spoken so far has laid out all the seedbed for how something like this could happen. And when you announce that, we're going to be leaving, you're going to be on your own. I don't know if you can expect a large enough faction to stand up and say, okay, we're going to be on our own. Let's prepare. Let's go. I think, what you're seeing right now is essentially an Afghanistan brain drain. All the people that were impacted by the last 20 years of sort of Western values, education, hope, vision for the future, or maybe the vision of democracy, they're the ones that are trying to get out because they know that it's going to go back to the way it was before. And this is a cycle that the British, the Russians, now our turn. I think it's going to be devastating for the people that want to get out of there that can't get out. That's going to be the true tragedy. Little girls that grew up in a free society being able to get an education and look forward to a dream of having a career or choosing to be a mother, whatever it is, that's going to be taken away from it. I don't know how that shock is going to be handled. It's a tragic situation. We had 20 years to think about it. I'm really kind of puzzled that there wasn't a better execution on this back end, a gradual execution of an exit strategy. I think that's unfortunate. We're going to be analyzing this and the mental health impacts of this, for decades to follow. And, let's hope we learn something from it. We learned some lessons from Vietnam, certainly, but some of those lessons were forgotten in this situation. And there's going to be mental health ramifications all the way around the horn on this one.
Yeah. And to that point, we'll talk about it shortly, but you talk about people wanting to get out and needing to get out, and the clock being turned back 20, 30, 50 years. I think most of us saw the video of the U.S. aircraft, Air Force plane taking off and people literally hanging on. And then when they land, they find human body remnants on the plane. I can't imagine what that's going to trigger for anybody. But, we'll get into that shortly. Dan Caldwell, a Marine veteran who served in Iraq and now a senior advisor with a group called Concerned Veterans for America, said its members believe President Biden made the right decision to get America out of Afghanistan. He says their polling says a majority of veterans who have served in Afghanistan wanted to see us get out. To the veterans here, do you agree or disagree, and why? Meaghan, ladies first.
So 2 things can be true at once. I agree with leaving. I do not agree with how it was and is being conducted.
Dan?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Meaghan on that. I think we definitely should have gotten out probably a long time ago, but we should have done it in a better way.
And Chris?
Yep. All 3. Trifecta.
All right. Unanimous. So do any of you know any Afghans that you worked with who are still in the country?
I hope not, for their sake, because the interpreters that I worked with when I was there were just terrified that if they were found out, that their families would be executed, and so I hope that they were among those that got out.
Meaghan or Chris?
Yeah, we've gotten out a few families. We're still working on one more, I believe. Everything's changed over. Germany's taken over the control of Hamid Karzai Airport, International Airport. So things are kind of they've been out of our control, unfortunately. So it's going to be a challenge, and just seeing the daily updates that's the challenging part. And that goes into the mental health aspect as well of people who are here and people who serve down there.
Yeah, I echo exactly what Dan and Chris just said. Like, I hope that they all got out. And right now it's near impossible to if they haven't. And so that feeling of paralysis and being unable to do anything has been really challenging the past week.
So that same Iraqi war veteran, Dan Caldwell, also said he thought he had an inkling of what veterans who served in Afghanistan might be feeling because he had watched just about every place he served overtaken by ISIS. He said, I went through a range of emotions when that happened. I was angry, somewhat depressed. I felt empty. And I think that a lot of Afghanistan veterans are struggling with that, and they're struggling with it in their own unique way. Again, for our veterans, what emotions have you been feeling since the Taliban entered Kabul? Dan?
I guess it's kind of, I feel lost, for the longest time, I kind of justified the sacrifices that I made to, maybe giving these people a better life or something like that. And then all of a sudden just seeing it fall so quickly and so reminiscent to Saigon, it was like you just hit pause from September 10th, 2001, and then hit play on it again today. And all of a sudden the Taliban's back.
Chris?
Yeah, I've been struggling with it and challenged by it on, like I said, all those different levels. Once again, I have to refer back to Meaghan. She hit it on the head. I mean, it hits us on every level, the pride, the anger, the loss, and then the feeling of regret on our allies' part. And not even just allies, the actual people on the ground, the people who live there day to day, the men, women, children, and families, that their whole, especially those who are in that teenage 20-year bracket. I mean, imagine you're 20, we're all taking kids to college right now. Imagine your teenage son or your daughter saying, all that is gone now, and you're back to the Stone Age, and this is your new rule. So yes, it hurts for my service and the friends and family that were lost there, but it's ironically, I'm more concerned about the people who are left behind because I'm here and I could talk on this, but they don't have the opportunity. So yeah, it's very crushing.
And Chris, you sent an email to Skip and I about a week and a half ago when all this really started to unfold. And, to paraphrase it, you simply said, what the hell was I fighting for? Why? Why did I sacrifice so much? And I think, and I'm not a veteran, but I think there are going to be thousands or tens of thousands of veterans saying that right now. And hopefully we can help them get their voice out.
Yeah, and if I could just expand on that real quick before you jump to Meaghan, it's and with 9/11, your connection on 9/11. I mean, that's why I initially went. 9/11, let's go raw. That was what I was doing. That was my job, and I was great at my job. But once I was on the ground and in that human element, we're all humans. We all make that connections, and when someone's a good person, you can feel the genuineness there. And that definitely shifted my mission. The bad guys are still the bad guys, but end of the day, Marines are no better friend, no worse enemy. We want to get the job done.
Meaghan?
So yeah, I'm going to echo again what Dan and Chris just said. And for me, it's not necessarily even that the Taliban entered Kabul. I think probably some part of my brain recognized that was a distinct possibility that would happen. It's the feeling that we abandon and are abandoning those who served alongside us, and that we're also abandoning fellow Americans that can't seem to get out right now either. And Chris, to your point earlier, it's the grotesqueness that people would rather cling to a plane and risk death for the chance, the glimpse of freedom, rather than remain under Taliban rule. And that, just the idea of that, the humanity of wanting to say, like, I would rather live 30 seconds in freedom than live 30 years under tyranny in Afghanistan, is just such a powerful and overwhelming thing. So I've alternatively felt very angry in the present. And then I am mourning, to Chris's point about the future, I am mourning the future for people who thought there was hope, who thought there was the opportunity for education for their daughters or a job. I mean, there is a female mayor in a district in Herat, the third largest city in Afghanistan. And she has come out and said, I'm just sitting in my house waiting to die. And she was a leader. She was a mayor of a district. And now she's just sitting there knowing that the time is ticking for her. So I think I've alternatively felt any number of things, sadness, rage, anger, anxiety, and then just a paralysis of I can't do more, and I want so desperately to do something.
And Skip, obviously you have different experiences and bring a different perspective to this conversation. Can you speak to what an event of this magnitude does to the psyche of individuals who have sacrificed so much to see that this wouldn't happen, and yet it did happen, and it happened so swiftly? You're on mute. Sorry, Skip.
First off, I want to correct my statement from before. I meant to say graveyard of empires, not the cradle of empires or civilization. The conditions there have never been conducive for bringing about an outside imposed change. Now, directly to your question, we've been complacent in believing that we could actually walk away from this and maybe it would carry on in our image, if you will, and the way it's gone, and the tragic imagery, and all the finger pointing in every different direction, and plenty of blame to go around. It's a shock to the belief system. When you think about what's a metaphor for Joe, every person, what happens when you have an unexpected death in the family. What happens when you're, in a divorce and there's been unfaithfulness that you didn't know about, or any of these kinds of things, a job that you've worked at for 30 years, the company goes under. These are fundamental existential shocks to the system. And I think on a global level, we're seeing this kind of experience. Anybody, certainly people that have been there. I mean, let's face it, military personnel, maybe they go into the military for one reason, but when you're in the military for a period of time, you believe in the mission. You want to make a difference. You see yourself in a special role. And now what's happening now is calling into question. You may have had doubts when you were there, like, oh, this is a warlord nation. There's all the things that you may think about, but you still have that hope that what I'm doing has meaning. And, this is that kind of a shock. And it's certainly going to have an effect. I'm just hoping that the folks that were there and put their heart and soul into this can go back and pull out of it that, I did my best job. I did everything I could with goodwill to make a difference. And sometimes this is how it turns out, but my effort was not meaningless.
So, Skip, before the break, we were talking about how an event of the magnitude of Afghanistan's collapse affects the mental health of so many people, notably among the American population, those men and women who served in that country in hopes of establishing democracy and greater freedom there. The director of the Department of Veterans Affairs National Center for PTSD Consultation Program said it matters how a conflict ends. Dr. Sonia Norman wrote in her blog, even before Kabul fell, that people are looking for meaning. What does it mean that I went there? What does it mean that I risked my life? What does it mean that I saw other people lose their life? Why does an event like this make it difficult to answer those questions?
Well, a lot of times when you think about some of the negative mental health after effects of war, the first thing that comes to mind is post-traumatic stress. I think this is fundamentally different in the sense that people like Bill Nash have coined a term called moral injury, which, it is not the same as PTSD. It may have some of the same symptoms, but it's when you feel like, you've been engaged in a situation where you may have violated your ethical code, or you've seen things that you may erroneously think you could have prevented the death of a child, or you had to kill somebody that was questionable, but they were threatening. All these things that end up being things that follow you. And a lot of times they're called PTSD, but it might have a completely different flavor. I'd like to propose that, service members and the civilians right now are probably going through what I would term existential injury. So it's not just your own moral code, but the code of what it is to be an American, what it is to intervene for a righteous cause, but then to see this outcome not go out the way we thought it would. Now, we don't know how it'll shake out. Maybe many of those people that get out will lead great lives and maybe lead some kind of a revitalization of Afghanistan from afar. I'm speculating wildly here, but what we're seeing now is on par with the experience of this experiment of nature we call COVID, where everything in our perspective about how life and the order of it should be, and good triumphing over evil and all that has been shaken. Well, I think we're having that same kind of an existential struggle, and it has deep roots in, the America's position, say, after World War II, and all the things that have happened since then. We're really doing a lot of soul searching about what it is about being a leader in the world. And when it doesn't go the way we want it, how does that reflect on our intent, on our belief systems, on our values? And, a lot of core values are being challenged here, like leaving people behind. That's at the core of the military ethos. You don't do that. Look how long we still negotiate with Vietnam about missing in action, getting remains. So this is going to be a long thing, and it's going to take a lot of coping, this adjustment to the reality. And certainly you could have predicted that this would have happened at some point, but just the way it unfolded, let's hope we can learn something from this and maybe grow not only as individuals, but as a nation as well.
I'd like our veterans to answer those questions if they would. What does it mean that you went there? What does it mean that you risked your life? And what does it mean that you saw other people lose their lives? Chris, start with you, please.
Got me reflecting there. It doesn't really mean anything in a weird kind of way. That was my job. That is war. I mean, it's literally you kill and destroy everything that you can of the enemy. You deny resources. You do that. It's a horrific thing. War throughout history is, there are no winners or losers. Everybody loses. And kind of to Skip's point about, going in there, it's almost that nation building from World War I, World War II, going in there and we destroy a country, take away all its infrastructure, do all those things. And we feel this obligation as a U.S. Being the good guys, we want to try to save everything. We went to Japan, and luckily they were industrious enough to come out of that. We thought we could do that here. Same with Iraq and Afghanistan. That's not our role. The U.S. military is to fight and win wars, period. We're not a reconstruction, during the war, and Meaghan could probably speak to this, being an officer. It's, hey, you're a battalion commander. You're now the governor of this province that you know nothing about the culture, the language, the religious history, the different factions. And here's this interpreter. He's going to tell you his side of it. And so it makes it really hard. I kind of lost my train of thought, but yeah, it's very difficult to deal with all those things, but I'm fine with the job I did there. And the military aspect, I have no problem of doing my job. And I could go back like almost every vet and go back tomorrow. If they would send me in a plane right now, I would go and leave everything I left behind and go back. But yeah, it's the people I'm more concerned about. So that's.
And Dan, I've worked with you now for many years and have heard your story dozens, if not 100 times. You made a great sacrifice. What are your thoughts on this?
I guess I'm still trying to kind of figure it out. It's definitely hard to make sense of, and I just don't know if, when I'll get there, if I'll get there, like if there's sense to be made out of it. I mean, it's tough.
And Meaghan?
So I think for me, it's been about conceptualizing it around this legacy of service for my family. And that's what it meant to me, is that my family went, I was my right hand, I volunteered, and I desperately wanted to serve my country. To Chris's point, I would go back in a heartbeat. There are so many veterans that feel the same way, that they would do anything to go back, and many long to return to service in some capacity. And so the meaning making for me has been around, how do I build this narrative around the sense of service? And then how can I continue to serve in the capacity in which I am living now? And I would do it in a heartbeat. And it meant, in some ways, I understand Chris's point about it means nothing in some way. And then for me, in some ways, it meant everything. It meant this idea that I would volunteer for my nation when they called and they asked someone to show up. I said, send me.
Skip, what are the potential long-term mental health consequences for veterans because of this chaotic withdrawal?
Well, I go back to when I was a young sapling psychologist in 1985, working at the VA in Long Beach, working with Vietnam era veterans. And, I think back then we thought PTSD was an outcome, particularly to Vietnam, because a lot of the veterans that we talked to felt like their service wasn't recognized, that they were disregarded, that it was a failed war, and that amplified the incidents of PTSD. One thing people don't realize is that this is just a natural byproduct of war. World War II, in fact, the National Institute of Mental Health was formed on an executive order by Harry Truman in 1947 to deal with what they called combat neurosis. And so it existed back then, but in World War II, it was a different dynamic. There was a shared sense of purpose there. Vietnam, it was lacking in a lot of ways, I think in a lot of ways unrighteously. And veterans bore that burden of feeling like that their sacrifices, their efforts were mishandled and not, whatever you want to say about Vietnam. Now, coming to the present day, the visuals of this are not good. We may have anticipated it. And I'm sure from everything I'm hearing from people that were there on this podcast right now, I think I'm hearing a perspective taking that this is unfortunate, but what I did had value. And I think that's an important thing. But there are many people that aren't on this podcast that are going to be looking at this and seeing what these outcomes are. They're going to be questioning, why did I do it? What was I was called upon to do very difficult things. Did it matter? And in the end, that existential meaning, that meaningfulness is what carries people through later challenges that they face in life. So we're going to probably see an uptick of distress, whether I want to call it PTSD, moral injury, or whatever you want to call it. But hopefully the VA and other healthcare institutions that support veterans' well-being will rise to the challenge, and hopefully the message will be what you did had meaning. And that's the best I can come up with on this, because it is challenging to the psyche when you see some of these things happening now.
I saw a veteran on television say, seeking help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. I don't know that I've ever heard anyone put it like that. And I think that is a message that's especially important for veterans to hear right now. What's it going to take to get people, especially men who try to tough things out on their own, to embrace that philosophy? Meaghan, any insight?
I think just any discussion of it, right? Normalizing distress, to Skip's point earlier, making sure we're having these conversations, going outside your bubble, speaking about levels of distress that may exist. And I think it's also about finding influencers, leaders in the veteran space, and having them speak about it as well, and expanding that outward and making sure that that is being communicated. So that's really where I think that we can begin, and especially having men talking about it, those men leaders and those kind of power nodes talking about those things can really help.
Chris, any thoughts?
Yeah, exactly. There's always been a stigma around mental health, and you have that military mindset, male or female, doesn't matter. We're all kind of ingrained in this. We have to be tough, and it's that even that in our ethos, mission first, chupo first, second. So I think getting away from that kind of, and like she said, being out there and putting yourself out there. That's why I kind of put myself out there, and it is hard, but I try to do analogies that people could kind of, or metaphors they could relate to. If you break your arm, you're going to post a picture of it. You're going to be going to the hospital. You're going to get cast, and that kind of cool stuff. We seek treatment for medical help. Mental health is the exact same thing. Mental health affects our entire body. If you get a bug or a virus and you don't treat it, it's going to get in your body and affect your whole body. Well, that's mental health. And I think it should be just like everything else. So it just has to be normalized across the nation in our everyday talk. And I think the whole health movement is a good thing. And I'm starting to see, even going back on base and going to infantry units, seeing the embedded mental health person right in the regiment, and having the colonel standing there right next to them and being embedded is great, because that models mental health by our leaders, which we need to see. So, and we've had generals that, their son has taken their life or completed suicide. And so, and them speaking out, say, we need to do a better job of mental health. It has to come from the top down, and then an individual aspect of peers. I have a lot of friends watching and listening. I know a lot of them are trying to call in. And they have a lot of questions, but it's that peer modeling. We're having that one-on-one. We trust each other. So if Dan and I were friends on a personal level, and we're sitting in a different place, and we could talk, like, man, I'm hurting. Like, hey, yeah. And I think just having that conversation is being open. That's the hardest thing, being vulnerable. There's a whole TED talks around about vulnerability, and that's the hardest thing. But when we open ourselves up, we let out some of the pain, and we also bring in some of the healing. So that's a hard thing to have that conversation, no matter who you are, male, female, military, trans, whatever. Everybody needs to be vulnerable to healing.
Well, and that's a great point in terms of talking. And you mentioned stigma earlier, and post-traumatic stress, and something that you and Skip and I have talked about dozens of times. I think it's obviously very important that we talk about and talk to veterans, their family members, or survivors who are having a difficult time accepting this outcome. To our veterans here today, have you talked in the past week with men and women you served with? And what mental health perspectives are you hearing? Meaghan, I see you nodding.
So many. So many across the board, whether they served one tour in Afghanistan, multiple, whether they never served in Afghanistan, across generations, across military occupational specialties or MOSs. I'm hearing this kind of rampant sense of something uncompleted. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling angry. I feel some shame. I feel guilt. I feel rage. I'm hearing all of these things. And we're seeing this reflected in, there was a report that numbers to the Veterans Crisis Line have increased. I've heard from nonprofits that work with veterans and military families that they're having an increased requirement for care. And so this isn't like something that we're making up. This is really actually happening, and it's affecting not just the whole population, but all these individual people that are reaching out for care and looking for access. And so I have heard from all of them, and the best thing I can do, and I know that this is something we're going to talk about, but making sure that everyone knows the resources that exist and the ability to refer people if that distress is more than just like having, I just want to have a conversation with you and talk about this and kind of normalize my sense of distress in this moment. And if it gets worse, where can you direct them to find those resources?
Dan, how about you?
I really haven't talked to anyone about it yet. Just I'm still kind of trying to figure it out for myself. Like I haven't really reached out because I don't even know, how I'm feeling about it yet. I'm still trying to just get to the bottom of everything. And like the last topic you were talking about too, I think it's the problem with society. You look at like the greatest generation and how, like my grandfather fought in World War II, Vietnam and Korea. My other grandfather was in Korea. They came back and they never spoke about it. And, like I admired that. I thought that was how you're supposed to carry yourself. So I tried doing that for about a decade and it didn't work. I tried to tough it out and white knuckle it and it didn't work. And like a month ago, I started talking to a therapist finally, and it helped immensely, just to actually process things and actually say them out loud. And, I think it's just something that we have to kind of admit that we need the help.
Chris, how about you?
Yeah, the conversations have been overwhelming. And surprisingly, the Vietnam vets are the ones that have been most vocal and supportive because they've experienced this. And so they're going, hey, brother, I know what you're going through in a certain kind of way. I'm here for you because, and we have to reflect on them as well. I know we're, Afghanistan, Iraq vets, but our Vietnam vets paved the way for us here, and they did not get the happy return and go to the ballpark and the Wounded Warrior programs. And here's all this free swag and all this stuff that we don't need. They're the ones who created all these programs. So I think it's always like history. You have to look back to the people who got us here, and our Vietnam vets have been there for me. My brothers are still kind of sending stupid memes and doing what we do. That's our dark humor or coping skill. But, it's that honest conversation. I've had a lot of gut-wrenching conversations. I reached out to you. First thing I thought about was you guys in mental health, Chris and Skip. I was like, I'm hurting. What can we do? You guys are thought leaders in this space. Let's make this happen. So I'm glad this is happening today.
No, thanks for your time. And Meaghan, Dr, your pointer about what resources are available. Here's just a few that I've got in my notes. There's one called BeThereForVeterans.com. That's for the VA. Also, the Veterans Crisis Line, which is confidential support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365. That number is 1-800-273-8255 and press 1. There are several others. There's a National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And again, obviously call 911 as, I don't want to say last resort, but certainly the easiest number to call. So one veteran said, these recent events in Afghanistan are an incredible catalyst for reflection. In that respect, and this question is for all four of you, can anything good come out of this for veterans who served in Afghanistan and Iraq? Meaghan, go ahead. I see you reaching for the mute button.
Just trying to be proactive to make sure I can unmute myself. It's gotten better over the last year. I think that Skip said it perfectly, right? That this is an opportunity for reflection and truly an opportunity for change within the Department of Defense, but also from a broader perspective around what it means to be an American. So I think that there can be some good. There can always be a silver lining out of this. And my hope is that there is this opportunity for reflection, both within the veteran population, and for America at large, because this is so devastating. But my deepest fear, if I'm being honest, is this is being siloed again. I have friends who are very close with me who are not, affiliated with the military at all, who have asked me like, oh, is this a big thing that's happening for veterans? Now, kudos to them for asking the question. And I worry again, by virtue of being an all volunteer force, that we are not seeing the forest for the trees, and we're actually not having these conversations at a national level that we need to be. So I hope that opportunities like this can create this conversation so that we can have some change.
Chris?
I'm sorry. There's so many things going on. I'm going to
No, that's okay.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
Just, can anything good come out of this? You see any positive?
Yes, reflection. I mean, reflection and finding that new sense of meaning and purpose, and reevaluating your job, and a total reframe. And I think you said it earlier, or somebody said it earlier, like reevaluating what you did what you could do in your role. As an infantryman, I controlled my squad, team, platoon, and I did what we did, and everything above us, that's way beyond my pay grade. So just coming to grips with what you did, owning it, good or bad, and then just reevaluating where you're at. And then I think as a nation, it's that get knocked down 6 or 7 times and get back up. We have to get back up as individuals, as a nation, and that's a whole other topic. But we have to you can only help. You're going to control your little sphere of control, yourself. Control yourself, then work on your self-aid, buddy aid, and work from there and work outwards and try to do the best you can.
Dan, any thoughts?
I just hope the lessons stick. If we do go to war again in the future, I hope it's more transparent. We have a clear notion of what we're going for, what we're trying to achieve. Where is the end? So we don't get drug into another decades-long, situation across the world and then get forgotten about.
Chris, a few minutes ago, you mentioned veteran suicide. We were already losing more than 20 veterans a day to suicide. And the concern obviously now is that we may see an increase in veterans taking their own lives. Skip, what are some of the warning signs that someone could be suicidal?
Well, I think we have a seed bed here for some of that, in the sense of, one of the, if you distill it down to the final thing about suicide, it's a loss of hope, a foreshortened view of the future, the idea that everything is beyond my control. It's not going to change. I don't have any hope. I can't change it. And then suicide becomes an option that's, maybe more desirable than the pain people are suffering. And our job is to somehow get across the idea that there is help out there, and the help matters. And in addition to getting the help, you can, by going through that journey and overcoming this, you can be a source of help for your peers, your comrades, your brothers in arms, and to give people meaning from their suffering. I don't want to sound trite here, but when people go through traumatic events and get through to the other side, sometimes you see what people refer to as post-traumatic growth. And giving people meaning, or helping them to find meaning in their suffering, that may be as part of the military ethos of, being able to help your comrade, so that you get to the other side, you're going to be a source of strength for others. And maybe that's part of the message. But before you get to that message, addressing the stigma issue that you brought up, that is a big challenge, not only for service members, but for a lot of people. Mental health in society and worldwide is viewed as something that's a sign of weakness. It's getting better, but it's a generational, glacial change. This whole thing with the Olympics and gymnasts pulling out. I think that might have been a good thing for the world to see, that somebody at a high level of performance can say, hey, look, I got to tap out. And that's not a sign of weakness. And so, look at the World Health Organization estimates 600 million people are walking the planet right now with a mental health condition, of which fully 2/3 will never see the inside of a therapy office. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. And sometimes the military leads the way. I think the military is really trying to destigmatize, just like what you had said earlier, Chris, about asking for help is a sign of strength. And maybe that will follow over police officers, first responders, firefighters, people that have gone through really difficult things in their civilian existence. It's okay to ask for help. And hopefully we're gonna have the resources here to be able to provide it, whether it's formal clinical care, which is very good and has good outcomes, is available, or peer support. And that goes back to the suicide thing, helping somebody that's at risk for suicide realize that they have a role still to play in life, as dark as it seems now, and that role can be assisting your brothers and sisters moving forward from your suffering.
We have just about 2 minutes left here, and I want to share one last thing with our panel. The senior enlisted advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, an Air Force career special operator named Ramon Colon Lopez, urged veterans to be proud of what you did, because you've kept the country safe for over the last 20 years. What does it take to focus on a positive message like that when you're immersed in so much negative news? Drop the mic on that one. Yeah, I guess.
Doing what you're doing right now is part of it. Setting up a platform for us to talk, and however many number of people are hearing this, I think is a step that everybody has to be open to talking about in in a less finger pointing, blaming fashion, but in a way that is going to cherish sacrifices that people have made, and put value on that, and look forward to learning from those challenges and moving forward in a good way.
Dan Rose, Meaghan Mobbs, Chris Merkle, and Dr. Skip Rizzo. Sorry, Dr. Meaghan Mobbs. Thanks so much for being with us today. And as always, thank you to our wonderful audience for tuning in to Next Steps Forward. I'm Chris Meek. For more details about upcoming shows and guests, please follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/Chris Meek public figure. We'll be back next Tuesday, same time, same place, with another leader from the world of business, politics, sports, or entertainment. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.